Shalom, this is Daniel Stern from the Netivyah Bible Instruction Ministry, coming at you from our offices in downtown Jerusalem. And today I'd like to talk with you about the Hague, about the International Justice Court, the Court of Justice, the UN Court, which is based on a request by South Africa, a petition by South Africa, is decided to put Israel on trial for genocide. Now, I'm not even going to go into the fact that the massacre of October 7th happened and consequently the Israeli political and military leaders decided that we need to do something in order to prevent such things from happening again. You can agree or disagree. I hope that those who view this video agree that we had a moral obligation to fight against the brutality and the savagery of the October 7th attacks, and that is not even something that's up for debate. But what I do want to talk about is the idea that, let's break this down into a couple of things. First of all, the International Court of Justice is a 15-judge court with two additional judges, one from Israel and one from South Africa. Both sides of the case are allowed to add a judge to the proceedings. But besides that, the whole thing is not about justice. It's about politics. And that's true of many courts, and that's true of many institutions. But here, that is like most of the UN, it's very clear that everything that happens there is political, which isn't surprising. It's a body of politics, it's a body of nations, and most of what they do is political. And this case is no different. This case, on the part of the judges, are from countries that are extremely biased against Israel, that have very poor human rights records. And again, that is also a known phenomenon of the United Nations. Their human rights divisions are full of countries that are known for their wonderful record on human rights, such as Iran and China and Syria and so on and so forth. And anyone with half a brain can see that the whole concept of neutrality in this area is a joke. But again, let's leave that aside. But it's worth noting that the results are political and not justice-based, not logic-based, not reason-based, and not argument-based. The results of such institutions are political. And the glaring proof of that is that over the past years, there have been many times more resolutions against Israel than against pretty much all the countries of the world combined, which in and of itself is a joke. The Darfur is ignored. China is ignored with what they're doing to the Uyghurs and to Tibet. Everything is ignored except Israel, which of course proves to anyone with half a brain that it's all political. Anyways, South Africa is laying a claim at the gates of the International Court of Justice that Israel is committing genocide against the Arab tribes that live in the Gaza Strip, which like to call themselves Palestinians. And this claim has to show intent to destroy a people as well as action following up said intent. And of course, in my opinion, that's a ludicrous intent. Israel has no intent to destroy the Arab population of the Gaza Strip. Israel has intent to vanquish those that wish to cause it harm, which currently is the Hamas and those who support it. And with that in mind, and especially after the years of violence towards Israel, which of course were climaxed on October 7th, but have been going on for years, it's clear that Israel has to take a stronger action. Additionally, those who claim that we are conducting genocide also claim that we are occupying the Gaza Strip, that we are besieging the Gaza Strip, that we are controlling who goes in and who goes out. And now that claim is partially true. Israel borders the Gaza Strip, and the borders are generally closed. But first of all, that isn't that's a common phenomenon between countries at war. Israel's border with Syria is closed. Israel's border with Lebanon is closed. It's not uncommon to have closed borders with countries that are hostile towards you. Big surprise. Second of all, the Gaza Strip has a second border. It is a border with Egypt, a border that Egypt emphatically insists on keeping closed. We, Israel, and most of the world, wish to have that border open, wish to allow the civilians in the Gaza Strip to depart. The Egyptian government, led by Sisi, General Sisi, insist on keeping that border closed because they do not want Gazan civilians to come to Egypt. Why? Because of their own issues with the Muslim Brotherhood, which the Hamas is an offshoot of. They don't want the Palestinians in Egypt, and on a side note, no other country in the world wants them, but we're not talking about that today. So, the claim that Israel is closed borders with the Gaza Strip, while true, I don't find any problem with that. They have a second border, and it is very common to have borders closed between countries that are hostile. Take the Iron Curtain as an example. The borders between West and East Germany were closed, and no one said that Western Germany was besieging Eastern Germany or vice versa. The border between North Korea and South Korea is closed, and no one says that North Korea is laying siege to South Korea or vice versa. This claim is only true to Israel. Additionally, the claim is that we are occupying the Gaza Strip, something that has not been true since 2006. There have been no Israelis of any kind within the Gaza Strip after 2006. What else are the claims? That we control where people travel. No, we don't control where people travel within the Gaza Strip, but admittedly, during the war, we have strongly encouraged non-combatant civilian populations to depart the combat zones. We've allowed for humanitarian corridors, which, again, on a side note, the Hamas would shoot consistently at because they do not want the non-combatant civilians to leave, because they have been using them as human shields since 2006 and now. Something which, of course, raises the death toll of the hostages, the Arab hostages held by Hamas, who are not allowed to leave because of Hamas, are collateral damage as a result of the Hamas's brutality and hostility. The fact that they are being held hostage by the Hamas and cannot leave is unfortunate. I wish it wasn't so. I wish there were less civilians and non-combatants killed, as do all Israelis, as does the military, which once again proves that we have no intent to hurt the non-combatant population. It is unfortunate. It happens in war. Unfortunately, it's happening considerably more due to the Hamas holding their people prisoner and hostage. Likewise, there's talk about humanitarian aid being allowed in, not being allowed in, being allowed in, not being allowed in. First of all, the Hamas is taking the vast majority of anything brought in to use for their war machine. It is not going to the non-combatants. Second of all, this again has been true for the nearly 2 decades, that the billions of dollars contributed to the Arabs in the Gaza Strip are going to pad the billions of dollars bank accounts of the Hamas leaders, as well as to build 500 kilometers of terror tunnels, which are incredibly complex and expensive to build, as well as towards arming the Hamas for their conflicts with Israel. Additionally, anything that comes in now goes to them to continue, be it fuel for generators, anything else. The Hamas is, of course, again, my point is not to point out the Hamas war crimes, such as using hospitals, mosques, schools, and so on for their war, which is a war crime, but rather to say that Israel is trying to bring in humanitarian aid, but it is being diverted by the Hamas to its military uses. So, yesterday, a friend of mine said, if we brought in more aid, why are the kidnapped hostages from Israel receiving hardly any food and starving? Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, the reports are that they receive very little. But what I answered her, it doesn't matter what would be brought in. Even if the 10 times as much humanitarian aid was brought in, it would not affect the amount of food given to the Israeli hostages. And my point in this example is, similarly, even if 10 times as much humanitarian aid were to be brought in, it would not get to the non-combatants. It would be taken by the Hamas so that they can survive a longer siege and longer warfare and produce more hostile actions towards Israel. That said, one of the challenges of bringing in the humanitarian aid is that there's attempts to smuggle weapons in with it, and that there are checkpoints that slow things down. Currently, though, from what I hear, and again, to each their own on the opinion of the validity, that the checkpoints and entrance points of the humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip are not overworked. The quantities being brought to them are less than their full capacity, and more could be brought in, but isn't. I don't know who is the source for that aid. I believe it's not Israel. I believe it's the UN and Arab nations and so on and so forth. But the amounts that they're providing is not enough to reach full capacity. Anyways, moving on. We talked about intent, which there isn't. We talked about population movement. I have to say once more. There is a claim that the non-combatants are being harmed, and that this is terrible, and Israel is convincing and attempting to encourage non-combatants to move out of the primary combat zones through leaflets and telephone calls and radio announcements and whatnot. And then if they do that, then what comes next? The claim that we are forcibly moving them, causing refugees, and so on and so forth. So it's a lose-lose. If you move them out of the war zones, then they tell you that you are forcibly removing them. If you don't move them out of the war zones, then they die, and then you're blamed for genocide. I don't know. It seems like the goalposts keep moving. Not to mention that while this is happening, Pakistan forcibly moved 1.7 million Afghans, and no one said a word. But once again, we're not trying to look at the rest of the world, we're looking at this thing. So, genocide. What else is being talked about? Food, we talked about. Genocide, we talked about. Forcible movements of population, death. Let's talk about one more thing. What happens if the International Court of Justice decides that Israel is indeed committing genocide? First of all, the final decision should take a few years, so that's still far away. But what could happen is within a few weeks, there could be an injunction which it orders Israel and the Israeli army to cease and desist from all military operations in the Gaza Strip. And if that happens, then that is sent to the UN Security Council to vote on, and if that vote passes and Israel chooses to ignore it, then the UN Security Council can decide to put economic sanctions and other actions on Israel. So it's still a process. I would assume that the United States would veto such a resolution, but one never knows. Mr. Obama chose not to veto one resolution back in his second term. Who knows? In any case, this is still a ways away, but like I started with, it's all political. It's not about justice. It's not about fairness. The world only condemns Israel. There's no condemnation of Darfur. There's no condemnation that Guatemala wants to take over Guyana because it wants the oil reserves there, and that there's probably going to be a war between Guatemala and Brazil. Maybe it's Venezuela. I'm sorry, forgive me. I think it's Venezuela. Venezuela, Guyana, Brazil. Nobody cares. It's on the news for 2 days and then ignored. But with Israel, all eyes shall turn to Jerusalem. That's what I have for you today. I'll add that the court proceedings are happening January 11th. In the morning is when South Africa is making its claim. January 12th is when Israel responds to the claims. And we'll see what happens. Now, I am not a lawyer. And I am not your lawyer. And if you have any thoughts, if you have any comments, if you have anything to add, please feel free to comment below, to email me at daniel@netivyah.org, and I'll be glad to hear what you have to say about it. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless you all.